So we couldn't be more thrilled to have you guys on stage. Thank you for taking the time. IoT is, of course, a topic that's front and center these days in terms of how companies are thinking about security, how they're thinking about business enablement, consumer enablement, business models, everything. And of course, there's the tech behind it and how you make all that possible. So Robert's done a great job of introing you, so I won't waste time on that further. But maybe I'll start off with a question. And by the way, we will take some Q&A at the end. So if you're interested or have some questions about IoT in particular, or OT, or whatever the nomenclature you want to use, have at it. So maybe I'll start off with Andy in terms of Dell. Dell's got this massive, amazing legacy about desktops and laptops and servers and all those things. Also had a really provocative and great acquisition strategy over the years with EMC and RSA, and of course Pivotal and building that out, and Cloud Foundry, which we're very tied to at ForgeRock. And curious from the standpoint of maybe a starting point here, IoT and Dell, really, what's that all about?
Great. Hey, so first of all, Mike, thanks for having me up here. And I always start with an apology. As you can hear by my accent, I'm an East Texan. So I'll try and talk a little slower for the people in the audience. But no, I think if you really look at IoT, everyone has this image of it being all about the things. And the things range from a Fitbit to a sensor to a production line to a refrigerator to an HVAC system to a smart light bulb. And so I think we always have this mindset of IoT is all about the things, but I think it really is about data. And those things gather data on the world around us, and data stored is a cost center to most of our customers and businesses, and data analyzed is a profit center. And so if you play that out a little bit and you look at what Dell does, Dell is a data company. We help customers collect data, and we help them store it, but more importantly, you need compute to analyze all of that data. So essentially, we see ourselves as the engine behind any IoT project to be able to actually do all the analytics and treat it like an IT project. That's what we're in it for.
Yeah, pretty cool. And just as a side question, how does the company look at driving revenue through that? How do you make money in IoT from a Dell focus?
Yeah, I get asked that question by my boss every day.
Yeah, right. And your boss is who?
My boss is our vice chairman, a gentleman called Jeff Clark, who's been with Michael actually from pretty much the beginning. Well, what we do is we sell the infrastructure below that project, starting with, I think one of the biggest issues in any IoT project is to connect the unconnected. I think there's this perception again that most of the 20, 30, 40, 50 billion things that are going to be connected to the networks that we have over the next how many years. You ask any analyst, and it's almost like they want to do a one-upmanship on the previous analyst. So I don't know if it's 50 billion or 100 billion. When it gets into the billions, it's enough to be interesting for everybody. But you have to connect those, and not all of them are going to be new. There's a lot of legacy stuff there. Just look at elevators. And we have a lot of fun with the elevator companies because they talk about transforming their business from building steel cages that move people up and down buildings to looking at how do I become a ride per floor per person, OPEX-centric, revenue stream. Well, you don't just change your elevator because it's not natively connected to the internet. So there's a huge amount of legacy connections, I/O, that we have to connect to. And so that first problem is connecting the unconnected. And Dell helped do that through this whole notion of a new IoT gateway. And then you have to start the analytics process very close to where the data is. This whole notion of backhauling all of the data from the 100 billion things that we're going to have into public clouds is a noble notion, but the reality on the ground is it never works like that. You have to start to analyze that data very, very close. Otherwise, we'll have so much data that will collapse on top of each other. So our role is help customers connect the unconnected and start that analytics process. And that needs infrastructure, gateways, servers, storage, networking. And then if you are going to go and push that data into the back end of your data centers, and you're writing new applications and it's a new workload, then you should do that in a modern way of architecting those solutions, which is all about cloud native. And that's where something like Pivotal comes in with Cloud Foundry. It's just a better way to write apps that are transportable from private to public clouds. So ultimately, we sell infrastructure. We sell server storage, gateways, networking, and the software plumbing that goes into that, including what VMware are doing around data management and things management.
Yeah, no, that's great. Stacey, you've been writing about IT for a number of years, 15 plus years, Business Week, Fortune, et cetera, and also are famous for your IoT blog, that podcast that's out there. IoT, is it really game-changing? Are you seeing it today in the customers and the communities and ecosystems that you're talking to as you're going about your journey with both the podcast as well as your interviews that you're doing?
Sure. So it is game-changing, and a lot of people compare it to the Industrial Revolution. I'm not going to go as far back in time. I'm just going to go back to broadband. So think about when we went from 56K or 28K modems to like always-on broadband connections. Suddenly we had this influx of crazy companies. We had like Skype and Napster and later on Facebook. And that was a huge value creation, and it was built on top of computing. And then when we got to mobile connectivity, it was like even more. We got things like Uber and Waze, and again, no one would be sad if they worked for these companies. So IoT is just bringing that sort of level of technology to its kind of the ultimate end, in the sense that we will connect everything, we'll be able to gather data from anything cheaply, we'll be able to analyze it, but most importantly for businesses and even consumers, we'll derive insights from it very quickly and very cheaply. And this historically has not been possible, both at the scale, like cost scale, but also the types of things we're able to understand. Like, I can understand my dog's fitness activity, should I want to. That's not really useful to me, but tie that to somebody who's making, I don't know, heartworm medicine or medical studies about dogs. Again, it's a weird example. So I think IoT is huge, it's real, and most people, when they talk about it, they have no idea what's about to happen.
Right, and it's fascinating. We were talking backstage about the realities of it. And so in those interviews and podcasts, et cetera, that you're running, are customers actually deploying it? Are they starting to put it in production? And are they labeled IoT for that matter, or are they really just tech that people are deploying and it really is IoT, they're just not making fanfare about it?
Sure, so I'll go back to elevators, vertical transport as a solution. So I talked to ThyssenKrupp, and this is not tech to them. This is how they're going to evolve their business to compete in this new world. And so they look at it like, hey, we're going to connect our elevators. We've got all this awesome data on elevators. We're even going to connect Otis elevators, and we're going to use our data and our insights to offer preventative maintenance and other services. For their business, they've gone from selling the steel cage to selling always-on elevators for anyone. This has doubled or tripled their market size because they can do it for companies that aren't ThyssenKrupp elevators. And that's huge. So yes, it's real.
Changes their game, and it's real. And it's similar to the examples we had this morning we talked about Dyson and Marriott and a bunch of others that are IoT relevant, and Amer Sports, the Wilson basketball.
But to answer your question, Mike,
yeah,
sorry.
Sure.
I don't think our customers call it IoT.
Yeah.
And we joke that, when I get a salesperson asks me to come and give a pitch in our customer briefing center and they want to know about IoT, you know that you're like 2 years away from revenue because, they're trying to figure it out. What customers come to us with is what their use case or their business problem is. So they'll say things like, I'm a transportation business and I'm trying to look to save 30% on my fuel efficiency. Or, I'm a mining company and I offer heavy mining equipment, and when it breaks, I have to roll a truck, but it's really a helicopter because my mines are in Kalgoorlie, Australia, or the foothills or the big hills in Peru, and then I get out there with the wrong part that I have to haul up with a Chinook helicopter, and it costs a lot of money. And so I want to put sensors on all my mining equipment and then do predictive maintenance. So not only do I know what fails, but I know before it fails so I can keep my customers up in those mines that might be generating $10 million of revenue for their end customers a day. They don't call it IoT. And so I think you've got to get beyond that hype a little bit into what are the real things that your customers are doing that you want to help them with. And then we almost breathe a sigh of relief because now it's a proper project that you can get into and start talking about both the business side and the tech side, and you can help them out.
You just couldn't, I couldn't agree more, frankly. I mean, it's the two examples we had are several this morning. BBC with the set-top box, they don't think of that as IoT. Yet we're securing the box itself and the human relationship with that box and the digital downloads from that. Same with the basketball. Amer Sports never talks about IoT. But they do talk about the connected ball or connected ski boot, et cetera. Yeah. Lasse, you know, one of the things actually that Andy brought up, and that is the amount of compute power required, the amount of data that's being driven and built or coming out of this interaction, IoT, et cetera, is the real value, the data. Yet there's such a massive scale of it being, you know, that's coming out of this interaction that it's pushing really the requirement for the compute and other things out to the edge. Can you talk a little bit about that? What does that mean? And also, what got announced last week, you know, at both the Dell side as well as the ForgeRock side?
Absolutely. Let me start there because I'm really proud to be up here with Andy and like Dell and also be part of their announcement for the EdgeX Foundry project in Hanover last week. At the same time, we kind of also announced the Edge Security project products from ForgeRock running on Andy and his team's gateways. So that was a great day for us in a new product coming out for us and also from a new kind of a compute paradigm, which you see. If you look a little bit back, we have all these compute paradigms, but seen it before, like every decade, kind of like suddenly kind of like it's mainframe, everything is in the cloud, is big in the back, and then you go client server, and it's kind of like everybody's installing kind of like print servers and file server.
What's client server?
Yeah, it was something that happened back in when you were young.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a couple of days ago. And then, of course, it was cloud. Let's put everything up to the cloud. But it kind of like, it basically doesn't work for a lot of reasons. And I think I'll give you a couple of samples, of course. If you have like a car, for instance, the amount of data a car kind of like produces, are you just going to send that up to the cloud? Like, come on, it doesn't make sense. The other thing is kind of like also from a security perspective. Would you like everything of what you're doing kind of like without having any control at all? Again, like just send back to the cloud and then they can figure out what to do with it. So introducing kind of things like filtering, privacy, consent down on the edge, security on the edge, and also enriching the data, because if you, at the endpoints, at the edge itself or the device, you can add an identity to it. Remember, when you then get the data back into the cloud and you can start doing analytics, and you say, I don't not only have the data, but I have the identity of the data, and I have consent of actually using it. Those three together is just mind-blowing, and it will change the industry.
Yeah, thank you very much. Andy, Lasse brought up the announcements last week, et cetera, in Hanover. What is exactly the EdgeX Foundry, and as an open, source, open platform play, why is that important?
Sure. Yeah, and I think the first thing to understand is why I don't see IoT or these use cases as just another workload that we're talking about because it's fashionable. Is the difference here is you have, in a lot of use cases, two organizations coming together that never did before. You've got IT people that really understand big data. They understand how to pull that data in and manipulate it and link it to their ERP systems and their CRM systems. And that's what they've done for years. And they've got data scientists, and they know how to bring the data in. But then you've also got what we call OT, which you would never call someone in these use cases, operations technology. But these are people that run oil rigs, run factories, run farms, and they're operating a certain technology in their field, or they are the business owner. And you have to have these two organizations come together to meet and hand over the data from the devices, the things, into the corporate network. And then what we found was that that handshake is really hard because everyone's things are different. You know, even the protocols, the legacy protocols I talked about, like BACnet and Modbus and CAN bus, and I guarantee you, like 3 years ago, I knew nothing about what those were because I don't know anything about buildings or smart farming or what have you. But all of that data comes into the corporate network, and it's sort of alien to IT, and it's all different. Even BACnet or CAN bus is different, even though they're standards. And so what we found was this massive fragmentation at the edge was causing customers to take way too long to go off and implement their IoT solutions. And they were all solving the same problem, you know, in silos. And, you know, and Dell has a legacy of openness. I mean, that's what Michael built the company on, is open standards, open, you know, interoperability. And so we felt that, you know, it's going to take ages for all these standards to unify and come together. And so we said, let's go build some code that does that. And then we were going to initially shrink wrap that software ourselves and sell it. I'm like, well, we're not solving the problem then, you know? So EdgeX was formed on a basis of helping customers to ingest all of this data at the edge and then have a microservices architecture so they could sort of put in the pieces that they wanted, whether it's an application or a security module. And so you could really, really quickly get customers thinking about how to do their IoT projects versus how to build, you know, sort of code to get all of this stuff to work together. And that's what EdgeX is. It was launched last week in Hannover Messe in Germany, which is the biggest industrial event. I think there's 250,000 industrial people there. It's a scary place to be when you come from the IT world. And I think it's gathering great momentum because now you've got a real solution that helps to sort of bring together the fragmentation. I know I'm talking too much, but I'll say one other thing because I think it's really interesting that every open source project has a spirit animal. And so we spent days in conference rooms working with the Linux Foundation of what is our spirit animal going to be. And we chose the octopus because now we've got our tentacles into all of these things. And then someone did a lot of research. You know, when you have a lot of smart people, especially on the tech side in Dell, they do a hell of a lot of research. And I found out that actually octopus have like mini brains in all of their tentacles. So it was beautiful, this analogy to the edge, because essentially that's what we're doing. We're driving intelligence, you know, out of these big clouds back into the edge and into the things or the edge of the network.
Yeah. I think also kind of like shows the big difference on IoT. No company can do everything alone.
Yeah.
So that's why kind of like being part of the EdgeX Foundry project is amazing. Kind of like you need the edge hardware, you need our identity software, you need connectivity, you need the kind of like the AT&T of the world and the Verizon. So it's an ecosystem play, which kind of also is one of the reasons that deploying stuff and actually getting something into production, it takes more time, basically.
Yeah.
And I have no dog in this hunt in the sense that I am not producing any of this. But I will say that the biggest challenge that I hear from people that I talk to who are deploying these systems is that it's not scalable. You have to hire a systems integrator and these consultants, and it's a pain. Then you write all these protocols, and it's like introducing every single person like at a big wedding. It would be awful. But in this case, this takes all that away. It makes it scalable. So it's like maybe it's if everyone at your wedding wore a name tag. I don't really know. Again, bad analogy. But I will say, so I'm looking forward to seeing how this plays out. I am worried that it kind of creates more abstraction. It is a middleware layer that's kind of abstracted out. And that always, the OT people, they love to touch things. They love to see everything. And I'm worried that maybe it will get a little bit messy as they start kind of digging into that.
I think it's one of the areas I want to dig into it a little bit more, in fact, on this dialogue, because we've seen it many times in dealing with customers that you've got one side of the house that is IT, and you've got the other side of the house that owns product, engineering for their products, et cetera, whatever they are, a car manufacturer, or, you know, a toy manufacturer, whatever. And those two don't seem to talk a lot. and they don't share as much as maybe they should, and yet I think what we're seeing in this energy is that if they need to talk, they need to collaborate, especially when you start to look at, like we talked this morning, the coming together of a human's identity, people, the users, the consumers, with the identity of the devices and the things and the processes and the data, to Andy's point as well. Any other further thoughts around that chasm starting to come together on the product side versus the IT side?
I think Stacey's right. And by the way, we share. I would say that because she's interviewed me a couple of times. It's terrifying. But no, I think she's right because, you know, the messy thing is we deal with people, right? Yeah. The machines are the easy part. The people are the hard part. So, you know, we've got a couple of great customers. One is Emerson Electric, and Mike Devereaux runs their IoT organization, and he has, you know, done a lot of these sorts of panels, and he starts off by saying, hey, the tech was the easy part. It's the people that are the hard part, you know. So they've gone and looked at, in Emerson, how they sort of convert some of their offerings. They sell pump valves. That's the other thing I know a lot about is pump valves and the Internet of Cows. I know about cows, connecting cows and pump valves. Things I never thought I needed to know about. But they're moving that.
I bet you're awesome at parties.
I am. But they're moving that pump valve, so selling a physical thing to selling pump valves as a service and sort of charging for the flow of fluids around that. So Emerson went on this journey. You know, they got that sort of tech working, therefore you need a lot of sensors, you need to make sure they work, they're mission critical. And then they're like, look, we're done. You know, we got the offer up and running, and then he said, well, we forgot to train our salespeople. Our marketing people need to, you know, be completely, you know, in a different sort of mindset as they market the solution. Our CFO needs to know that we're going to book revenue in a different way. And so it's this, once you've sorted out the OT and IT coming together, and I agree there's still huge challenges in that, and people want to hug and touch, you know, it was similar to IT 25 years ago or 20 years ago when I got into it. You know, there was battles against data center and you know, and distributions. But they forget that there's all these other functions in the company that have to come together to make this real. And often the barrier is humans not wanting to change. And you know, that's where I see, you know, a lot of lack of understanding from customers. And again, lack of the scalability is the tech becomes the easy part. How do you transform your business?
Well, and there are real implications. So with Emerson, I know that they are looking at their process management, so factories that refine oil and make drugs and things like that, any sort of chemical process. So one of their ideas is they will automate the heck out of this thing, and then they'll put all of their experts, because in a lot of these old line industry, they're seeing their experts start to retire. So you don't have the guys who understand how the factory operates. So they want to put all those guys kind of in one place and then let the factories kind of run themselves. And that's a really hard sell if you're trying to sell that to all of your factory workers. A similar thing's happening with like IoT in medicine. Cleveland Clinic is looking at setting up rural healthcare kind of beds with monitoring, and then the doctors are all in a central location. These are really big business changes, and people, I mean, we're talking the employees, we're talking regulators. I mean, it's a big endeavor.
Nonetheless, mandatory and,
Yes.
and critical to their survival. We had a slide up earlier today that talked about the survival of retailers and their huge chasm that they're going through of brick and mortar, and some of them don't have digital strategies really, and connecting the digital to physical, and the huge shift that occurs. But, you know, the IT people, the store operations people, you know, they're not used to working in new unique ways, or at least some of them anyway. Lasse, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was relationships.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that we consistently talk about is it's not a singular, you know, bit on, bit off security element to a device and a device and a device and then a human, but actually more of the relationship of those things. What is that all about? What does that mean?
Absolutely, and I think kind of like, as you know, 3 or 4 years ago, we brought the new term IRM out together with some friends out to you guys, and focusing on the relationship instead of the old-fashioned IAM concept. And as with the humans, kind of like, I think the magic is in the relationship. And if you then kind of like goes from humans over to things, it's kind of like, it's pretty easy to understand having the identity of a human in the car and the identity of a car, and you actually, you know who's in the car. You can start doing a lot of interesting things because there's a relationship between them. So you can do personalization. But these things are also kind of like very temporary, which is not the case with human beings, of course. So maybe for car sharing, fleet, all these kind of new services, you kind of like might want to changing the relationship for like 2 hours because your son or your daughter is driving in the car. And maybe on that identity, you enforce some kind of like restriction that don't go kind of like more than 60 miles per hour, whatever. And then I think if you take the human identity, take the thing identity, and then start talking about services and applications, I think you're starting to get a lot of value and can build a lot of new business model there. And for instance, kind of like, again, back to the car, if you have a Netflix kind of like service, you have kind of like a Spotify service, wouldn't it be nice when you go into the car actually have great speakers, you authenticate yourself, and also kind of like your Spotify account is actually also coming up on that IVI system in the car, just because there's different relationships and you can connect them together.
Absolutely changes the game.
Yeah.
So the connection of the identities of all of these things together and
Absolutely.
what their relationship is and what that drives in terms of business.
And across different businesses. So you take that example into cold supply chain. How do I get food from the farm to the fork? Retailers are sort of paranoid against poisoning their customers. Why? Because they changed legislation recently in the US. So if you continually poison your customers, you don't get fines, you actually go to jail now. And the reason is, one high-profile fast food chain decided it was cheaper to poison their customers than go fix the problem. And so they changed the rules, and they're like, okay, CEO, you can now go to jail, and guess what? They did something about it. But you look at that supply chain of food, it starts in the ground, and then it gets transported across countries or nations or continents, and then it goes into depots, and then it goes into retail environments, and then it goes into your refrigerator. Well, in the future, the identity of that food will be followed across that whole trail. In fact, not that I am an advocate, but the marijuana industry in the US, which is legal in some states now, is forced to go and track that in their supply chain. And so how do you do that across different businesses? How do you ensure that the handoff of identity from one to the other is done? These are problems that are huge but have to be solved, and to Stacey's point earlier, at a mass scale. Because if you want to go and track every orange, every apple, every banana, every strain of marijuana, medical plant, let me just make sure it's a medical example I'm using, then you're going to have to do this at micro sense and at a scale that we've never ever seen before.
Do you think that's really going to happen?
I do.
Okay.
I think it has to.
Do you?
I really don't know. When I think about that, my brain is just like, yeah, no, that's just going to be expensive. And the value of tracking every single orange, tracking every single orange from a certain crop or shipment makes sense to me. But I'm not sure how low we can go or how far out we can go.
Yeah, I think it's as the price of silicon gets closer to zero, it will become a reality. I mean, if you look back, if we were sitting here on stage 40 years ago, what was the guy from IBM was famous as saying that there's never going to be a need for more than 10 PCs in the world. Well, I think he just couldn't envision a future where silicon was so cheap, wireless was so pervasive, all of these sorts of things. So I don't know if it's in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And again, there's probably a business reason why you don't want to track every apple, every orange, but every shipment. But yeah, I think the technology is reaching a stage where we can get down to those sort of cost points. The biggest challenge, I think, is the interoperability of software versus anything else.
Right. Fantastic. We have just a couple minutes left, and I'm just curious, are there any questions out in the audience for the panel? We've got one straight and back. I don't know if we have roving mics. Maybe, yes, we do. Go ahead.
Okay. We're a customer of both, we use both PCF as well as ForgeRock for identity solution. I was wondering if you guys can elaborate on how you're going to further integrate specifically at the container level.
Yeah, I didn't catch the whole.
Right,
So
we-
ForgeRock and
PCF.
Pivotal.
We use Pivotal Cloud Foundry for the development of our microservices, and obviously we're using ForgeRock as our identity and access management solution. You know, and what we're looking to do is to find out when, at the container level within Pivotal Cloud Foundry, when will there be integration between ForgeRock and PCF? That's not there today.
Yeah, I'll just be honest, I don't know the answer, but happy to sort of meet up afterwards and find out. I think we could, you know, work on it pretty quickly and on a case-by-case basis, but I don't have the roadmap right in front of me. But happy to chat with you.
Talk about the microservices.
Yeah, I can give a little bit more kind of like, because we're working with the Cloud Foundry team in San Francisco, and we started that kind of like 12 months ago. So what we're doing with the ForgeRock stack, so to speak, is kind of like making it deployable in all different types of scenarios. So kind of like whatever kind of like PaaS system you have, being Cloud Foundry or kind of like you go to OpenShift or something like that, we can actually deploy that. There's a lot of different DevOps tools, there are different kind of like container systems like Docker, and what we want to do is make sure that kind of like our stack is actually ready, and you can kind of choose where you want to deploy it, and also you will see pretty soon transforming a lot of this stuff also into microservices. So, but I can give you more details in back, but we've been working with Cloud Foundry for like 9 months now, and also have things like servers bindings in place to connect.
Great, I think there was another question. Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Gökhan from Accenture, and
Yeah, your mic's not on. A little help?
Can you hear me?
There you go.
Okay, hello, I'm Gökhan from Accenture, and I have a little bit of challenge for you guys. So we talked about open source product here. Every one of you talked a little bit about it, and one of the common challenges that we are facing in the client environment, reflection on the trust here, based on the Ken Thompson's Unix concept here, old paper. So how can you explain in a couple of sentences, how do you convince your clients to trust them, trust you for the code totally that's not being created by you? So basically, how can you convince me I would trust your code?
Yeah, so there's multiple answers to that. It's a great question. Multiple answers to that question. I can give the ForgeRock version, and then Andy, maybe you want to talk about the Dell side of that and the community as well. On the ForgeRock side, we are a company that software is based on open source, an open source platform. You heard Scott earlier today talk about open source and our foundation of coming out of those open source roots. We also build enterprise versions of that are hardened and framed up for enterprise use and that type of thing, but still have an open, vibrant community as well. So we like to, especially with the security vein on this, it's very important for us to be able to have a purview into a hardened enterprise version as well as the open community versions, and having both of those run, but both based on the same core platform of technology. Interestingly, also, I think that we heard from Stacey and Andy was that you base what you're building on open standards and you lead with that. And I think Scott also touched on that this morning, that things like this broad view of using technology across so many vendors that are going to be required to make IoT successful is going to mandate that these open communities and innovation areas, for lack of a better word, across companies and collaborative ecosystems is going to require that they operate with open standards and including new standards that may be developed as part of that community, much like the AGL community that I talked about this morning, Automotive Grade Linux, which is really an open source platform, right? And it's all about creating the next version open source car operating system, right? Open source. Now, there will be variants that will be based on what does Ford want to do with that? What does Nissan and Toyota do with that? And they're all members of that open source consortium, and how they build off that, differentiate off that, and create additional value elements to it. The last thing I'll say is, as part of an open source community and building our software on that baseline, as well as what Dell's doing around EdgeX, et cetera, is that you also create a level of trust in terms of what you're building and a level of transparency. So it comes down to also being able to understand where that code came from and the open standards that went into building that and framing that architecture up. I don't know if Andy, if you have anything, or Stacey?
Yeah, I think Mike nailed most of it. And let me be clear, EdgeX is not a Dell thing. It's a Linux Foundation thing. We provided the early code, and because we were trying to solve the problem, and now we hope the community gets that code and does two things with it. One is enhance it in areas that we didn't get to, and the second is we fully expect a company to come and harden and commercialize it like any other good open source, initiative. We just don't think that should be us right now, but there's other people out there that have, shown a lot of interest in hardening that code and been the commercial delivery mechanism. I just think the more open it is, the more people can choose whether they want to go harden it themselves or use, a third party, should that third party come available. It's sort of a choice of both. The one thing I do believe, though, is as this new piece of the architecture called the IoT gateway, or the edge, the fog, whatever term the industry sort of connects on, in a lot of cases that is going to be mission critical. And so I believe someone does have to harden that code and make it an offer that can be as mission critical as the use case requires it to be.
Great. I know we're over on time, and I don't see one last hand, leave the last question, and then we'll get off
mic
stage.
coming.
Here comes a mic coming. One sec.
I'm Mana Khalil from Verizon. So I heard Andy mention a lot about like connecting the unconnected, and people still don't call it IoT, and then human don't need to change. And this is probably more true in the consumer world, where we haven't really seen the proliferation of IoT in the homes in the new real sense of IoT. I still have relatively new USB printer, 15-year-old printer, and a lot of storage that's connected to my computer. And these are a lot of the things that everyday people want to connect and interact with from their office, from the road, right? And I haven't seen anybody like doing anywhere a bridge between USB to IoT, because this is more like the adoption through migration of everyday technology, just like you do the elevator. Not everybody will afford a $250, $300 thermostat or like your IoT gadgets, but for IoT to become more of a consumer notion that everybody can connect to, it should start looking at converting your everyday wireless webcam or your wired devices so that people can gradually understand what it is. And that's where I think there is a big disconnect. What do you think?
So I think there's a lot of reasons that IoT the concept of the smart home hasn't really hit the mainstream yet. When you're talking about your existing devices, many people I talk to, both printing, I talk to white goods, so big appliance makers, they're not interested in retrofitting older stuff. So some of these things you're just gonna have to buy new. So when you buy your new printer, it will be smarter and connected wirelessly. The other thing I would say is look at TVs. Those right now have the biggest opportunity, both in computing power, in network power, and sometimes you could even get like extra radios that talk to other devices like light bulbs. That's one way that it might enter the home and become more convincing, but we're still not there yet, and we're not there for a couple reasons. One, a lot of these devices are too expensive. Two, we haven't converged on standards. And three, we haven't found a use case for a lot of people that's super compelling to get them to buy new stuff or even to go through the effort it takes to connect something. And I think we're gonna see that in the next couple of years, but we're not there yet.
Anything?
Yeah, I haven't actually spent a lot of time on consumer IoT, so Stacey is way more of an expert than I am. But I agree with the last thing, and again, we're very commercially focused, and just because we're a commercial company at Dell, But I think the killer app is the what they call the killer app. That's the main thing, and I think the Nest has done really well because it shows consumers real value. I mean, I put 2 Nests in my home in Austin, and I've saved hundreds of dollars in the summer, so I can visibly see that. I think it's more of those apparent, really, really in-your-face benefits that's needed before people go and invest. And I agree with Stacey on, as a manufacturer of printers, you want to sell another printer. You don't want to retrofit the ones you sold 5 years ago. So I think that's what's going to, sort of hold it back.
Just like an industrial, consumer and home need that. It's not even a single killer app. It's probably a killer app per device.
Yeah.
So you'll work from the use case, not from a, let us connect everything in my house and it will work magically. Although I wish that would happen.
The only place we kind of like, and especially in Europe, in some countries, we see there is movement in smart home. And it's back to the thing with like, what is the compelling event? And if you see a lot of things going on in Europe, it's about the health industry. And the people get older and older, and kind of like that gets more and more expensive taking care of them. So if you can actually have elderly people staying 2-3 years more at home before they have to move into some kind of care, that is big savings for society and for the governments. And that is absolutely a more compelling thing to go after than have kind of like your light bulbs go green and red and whatever you want to do. So I think we're starting to see more compelling stuff. And I don't think the next killer app is an app, basically.
It's a use case, yeah.
It's a use case.
Listen, I'd like to thank our panelists today, Stacey, Andy, Lasse. Thank you so much.